Extension Service. If you'd like to call and ask Bob your questions about your lawns and your gardens and such, you certainly may do that at 479-1160 or 349-WCCS. We've not had a lot of calls lately. People must have their lawns and their gardens all perfectly fixed.
Maybe.
They've heeded so much of your advice down through the years.
Either that or they haven't returned from Florida yet.
You think that might be
Jack's
the case?
brain is functioning very well this morning, right?
Yeah. We'll find out. I'll look it up, Jack, and we'll answer that question for you. I'm right, he says. You don't even need to look it up. All right. Well, anyway, 479-1160 or 349-WCCS. Question to start out this morning, Mr. Robert, is weed control in the early season. You get those weed sprays that say this is an all-season-long type of thing, but that can't be the case. You're not killing it. You're only stunning it if it comes back. But weed control early in the season within your lawn. You want nice, beautiful grass and not weeds and everything. And dandelion, of course, is the big weed. But the lawns get filled up with the weeds. And what is the best approach to eradicating them and replacing them with really nice grass?
Keep after it.
Okay.
Don't let them get out of control. And we've got a series of different types of weeds. So we have annual weeds that will invade, everywhere, whether it's the yard or garden. We have biennial weeds. Those are weeds like the dandelions, which the seed will germinate last year, over winter, and continue to grow this spring, and then it'll flower and make those nice white puffy seed heads and spread all around again and start to process over again. But that plant actually takes kind of 2 seasons to mature and go through its complete life cycle. Just another way that it has to survive versus an annual, which has to germinate from seed, grow, flower, go back to seed, all in one growing season. So we have those biennials, and then we have the perennial weeds, which are going to live for multiple years if we don't do something about them.
Yeah.
And they have a perennial root system. They may still die back every year. The top will die back on its own, but that root system remains intact and will continue to keep going and start all over again. So it looks like it's starting again this spring, but in reality it's been there, just went dormant. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a herbaceous perennial. We have herbaceous perennials that we cultivate in our flower beds.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's a perennial plant, but the top dies back every year, and then it comes up each year with new foliage and continues to grow. So
it is the tulip of weeds.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So we've got creeping Charlie or ground ivy is violets are another example. Those would be those herbaceous perennial weeds that continue to survive multiple years. Those perennial ones are the tougher ones to deal with. They're more persistent. So we treat them. We may think we have them, but that root system still has ways to send up new shoots and continue to let that plant go. Or a fragment of that plant or a fragment of that root system is able to generate a new plant and continue to grow. So with that ground ivy, they vine. It's like a vine, but it roots every inch along its stem.
Wow.
And sends up another pair of leaves, roots, grows another inch, does the same thing. So you can get a partial kill on that plant, but leaving just one section with a set of roots will allow that to continue, and then it starts to spread from there.
You can get papa weed and mama weed, but then you have to deal with baby weed.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the same thing. Letting these plants, whether they're annuals or perennials, we want to try to avoid letting them. We can let them flower, but we don't want to let the seed mature, because then even if you kill that mother or father plant, then those seeds are there, and then they'll lay in the soil, and when conditions are right, the soil temperature and the moisture, then they'll germinate again. Yeah. So it's best to, with perennial weeds, the fall, late summer, early fall, is kind of a key time to try and deal with those, because those perennial ones at that point in time are sending energy down into that root system so it can survive the winter also have enough energy to sprout and continue that plant growth in the spring. So using, and most of the weed killers that we would use on lawns are going to have some systemic activity that they'll get into the root system, get in, spray them on the leaves, they'll move into the plant, move down to the root system. As that plant generates food for itself and moves energy to the roots, it'll move the chemical to the roots and kill the whole plant. So that's kind of a strategy to deal with these perennials. Now, if you don't have a very large area, you can still try to manually remove those. A little bit easier with dandelions, unless
unless you're carpeted, which everybody is.
with them. But if you keep after it in a small scale area, it is possible to keep ahead of that. And you can do it that way and just have a weed probe that will get down in, loosen up that soil, and allow you to take that taproot out that looks like a carrot, and get the vast majority of that out of there, and then that'll take care of that plant. Otherwise, you've got to use some other method, usually a weed killer, to deal with that.
We had a caller who couldn't stay on the line, but asked me to ask you this question. What is the best depth at which to plant onion sets?
Usually about an inch.
Okay. And when you set them, you have
Deep.
to make sure that the little root thing at the end, at the bottom, is at the bottom, and they're pointed upwards.
Yes. That helps a lot.
Yeah.
You want the...
So you want to go an inch deep? You want the soil to be loose?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
That helps, just to have loose soil, so that you can even just push them. You know, if the soil's loose enough, worked up enough, you can just kind of push them right down, because they're a bulb. Just push them down. Usually we try to go not more than twice the diameter of the seed, depth-wise.
Okay.
So that's a kind of a rule of thumb for, yeah. So whether that seed is an eighth of an inch long, those, it does, you're spreading those pretty much on the top of the soil, with just a slight bit of cover, versus a bulb, which can be a little bit deeper.
Okay.
But you still want the top of that, the narrow part of that can be sitting right at ground level. Is enough.
Okay. Here's the second
And
question.
Same thing with garlic.
Yeah, okay. Second question coming along with that is, once that begins to grow and you get a nice big onion underneath the ground there, and it starts to break through the surface, and you've got a shiny onion top. I think you told me this before. The temptation is, I want to cover that over because I want it all to remain underground, but don't do that.
Yeah, better not to do that.
Yeah.
You don't want to hill soil up around them.
Like you hill up the potatoes?
Like you hill up the potatoes. That's a good thing. We want to do that because potatoes exposed to the sun, underneath the skin will turn green, which we don't want to have. So we want to hill the potatoes, keep them covered. They are a tuber that needs to be in the ground. Onions on the base of that bulb is where the roots are. So the majority of that onion can sit right on top of the ground. The other thing that does, if you cover them up and keep them buried, then you have a greater chance of getting some root or rots starting to develop on there also. So,
all right, so there you go.
The roots are on the bottom. They can be in the. You definitely want those covered up. But as that bulb continues to grow and expose itself, it has outer layers on there that protect it, and it's okay.
Just a minute left with Bob Pollock this morning while we're in the garden. A good time right now to plant what? The cool season plants.
Yes.
And those are?
Yeah, so those onion sets, we can start getting into peas and spinach. Then
lettuce.
We get into lettuce, the cabbages, the broccolis, the cauliflowers. Those would all be cool season, radishes, beets.
So we could get all those in right now?
So we can start to get all those worked in at this point. So it depends on what your when is it you want to harvest these things. So we got to go back to when do we want to harvest, and then that helps us dictate when to plant. But we are really at the beginning of the season here. So if you start with trying to figure it out when you'd plant outside on bare ground, when would you do it? And so those onion sets, the peas, the spinach, the cabbage, and usually by, and here we are in the middle of April, so we could have already gotten some onions, peas, and spinach and those things in, and now we're kind of approaching that time for the cabbage and the cauliflower, the radish, beets, and even potatoes, lettuce, and then, a week later we'd move into carrots, chard. So
just a couple seconds left. One question having to do with the onions left over from last year that now have new growth on them.
Yes.
Good to plant them, toss them out. What should I do?
You as long as that bulb is firm, you could still plant those.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
But if there's any kind of decay or anything in there, then
don't do that. He's Bob Pollock.